is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt.
Good evening and welcome to Out in Front with Battleborn Progress. I'm Erin Rook, I'm the Story Bank organizer here at EBP, and I will be your guest host tonight. I'm excited to be joined by an all-star panel of folks working to advance the rights of LGBTQIA and Two-Spirit Nevadans. So I hope you all will welcome me. Joining our panel tonight, we've got Silver State Equality's State Director, Andre Wade, Gender Justice Nevada's Executive Director, Cy Burnaby, and Brooke Maleth, President of Northern Nevada's Transgender Allies Group. We also expect to be joined by Senator Melanie Scheibel once she's wrapped up doing her thing at the legislature. So I just want to thank you all so much for being here tonight to help us understand some of the upcoming bills that are impacting trans, non-binary, and intersex folks. So to kick things off, Andre, could you just tell us a little bit about some of the bills that are coming up in the legislative session that impact trans and non-binary Nevadans? Kind of what are they and what problems do they hope to solve?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you very much. I'm really happy that you all are having this forum for us to talk about these very important bills. So there's 2 of them that we are going to be talking about today. One of them is SB 163. It's a gender affirming care. So really, it will make it illegal for certain public and private healthcare insurance providers, including Medicaid, to discriminate against people based on their gender identity and perceived gender identity when issuing healthcare plans and agreements for participation in and coverage of gender affirming care. So health insurance providers would be needed to authorize those policies and plans and detailed requirements that must be met by individuals under the age of 17, which might be something we change. But there's also the idea of having these leading medical groups recognize that medically necessary treatment for gender dysphoria and other conditions are important, and we need to make sure that healthcare providers are health insurance are providing this through coverage without discrimination. And so, Brooke, if there's anything I missed in that, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, the key to this is that when we look at those types of procedures that are, specifically to treat transgender people, people that have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, what we're looking to do is to make sure that insurance companies don't hide behind cosmetic exclusions for things that can help, treat gender dysphoria. Traditionally, since the Affordable Care Act in 2015, we've seen plans that have been able to affirm a coverage for, genital surgeries. But when we get into other things like hair removal, hair transplants, voice therapy, and facial feminization surgery or masculinization surgery, that those were, termed as cosmetic and therefore excluded. There's been numerous, case laws throughout the country that have shown that, you're really targeting this group of people that need care that is medically necessary for them to be covered with health insurance. We're paying into the plans. We need to be able to get the kind of treatments covered for what we need. And that's the whole basis of health insurance. This law brings all the health plans up to a basic level of understanding that this is what needs to be included. So there's not that guessing game. There's not, from the individual's perspective, there's not the administrative games for the insurance companies to play. that we really need this kind of treatment, following the medical pathways as detailed under the WPATH Standards of Care version 8, which came out and was published in September of this past year. So this keeps us up to date and keeps the pathway open for those in need. So
thanks, Brooke. And just for folks that might not be familiar, WPATH, right, stands for the World Professional Association on Transgender Health, right? So kind of the leading authorities making those standards. One thing I think we hear a lot in opposition to access to gender affirming care is this idea that it's, being pushed on people, or it's going to be like too easy to access. Can you tell me a little bit, Brooke, about what it's like currently for trans folks who are trying to access gender affirming care? Is that something that's fairly easy or challenging to do?
The biggest issue is being able to find providers that are caring, that are familiar, and that are comfortable with these kinds of treatments. Even on a most basic level, there's not enough behavioral health specialists to go around. There's not enough primary care to go around. There's not enough endocrinologists to go around. And that's just on the basic level. When we start looking at other types of interventions, specifically surgeries, it's even more difficult. We're seeing, 18 to 36 month waiting lists for facial feminization surgery. We're seeing the same thing for genital surgery. There is no quick way to get these needs addressed. We're working diligently to try to be able to expand networks. Some of the work we've done up here in the north with the, UNR School of Medicine is building a new cadre of family medicine physicians that are comfortable and willing and actually eager to see transgender patients within their primary health role and be able to begin and continue people on cross-gender hormone medication. So it's a wonderful thing that has been 10 years of work getting this far, and will still take another 10 years before we start seeing enough doctors out throughout Nevada that can be able to deal with the number of trans people that we have. So we're growing, but it's taking time. And welcome, Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Brooke. And yes, welcome, Senator Scheibel. Happy to have you here. I think it's a great pivot right now. Brooke was talking about the way in which SB 163 is a piece of the larger healthcare puzzle in a lot of ways, right? We've been hearing a lot about healthcare provider shortages, things like that. Wondering if you could just tell us a little bit, Senator, about kind of the origins of this bill and, the path you see it following as it moves forward, and what we should expect to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I always enjoy appearing on Out in Front, and I appreciate the invitation. And Senate Bill 163 is, like we've been talking about, it is part of a broader effort to increase access to healthcare for everybody in Nevada, including trans people here. And I originally introduced this bill in the 2021 session, and it did not pass in the 2021 session. At that time, we were also still working with some government agencies to determine how much they were going to assess the cost to be. And in the last 2 years, since the last session and going into this session, I think we've determined that all or most government agencies all in the state of Nevada already cover these services, or they've, figured out ways to ensure that they're going to include coverage for these, and it's not going to be an additional cost to the state. And I think that's largely because it's, the right thing to do, and it's the legal thing to do. Discriminating against people because they are trans is discrimination based on their gender and or gender identity, and that is illegal. So I'm really looking forward to hearing this bill in about 2 weeks on March 15th. That's a Wednesday morning. I'm sure you already told everybody that, but it's been rescheduled because of the snow, and that's fine. I think that I hope that the committee is receptive to it. There's always a challenge when you try to mandate an insurance company to do something, which I'm sensitive to. I don't like being told what to do either. However, there are times when, if people aren't going to do the right thing on their own, we're going to tell them that they have to. And so I think that the reception has largely been positive. People want to do the right thing. Insurance companies want to provide this coverage, or at least they want to, be in compliance with the law. They want to be good actors in this space, which I think even that is a change from previous sessions and from, an old sentiment that might have been less welcoming. And so I'm hopeful that we'll have a good hearing on the Senate side. There will probably be some amendments to the bill. There will be at least one amendment that I'm proposing myself. And then there may be some other amendments along the way before this passes the full Senate and goes over to the Assembly for hearings on that side.
One of the things to chime in on what Senator Schreiber was just saying, no insurance company necessarily wants to be the first to jump into this kind of coverage, because that can, take their plan out of the competitiveness, because they're covering for more types of procedures than a competitor is. However, one of the strategies that lies behind this bill is that when all insurance companies have to do it, then it creates a level floor for their cost basis. So if everybody has to do it, they're still on that competitive equilibrium. So therefore, it doesn't give one person an advantage over the other, which is, in this case, everybody wins. Another point about this kind of coverage is we know that when trans people, when any person is not having their needs met because of cost factors, that the things that they need are not being covered in what they're paying into an insurance plan for, they have a tendency to avoid going to get critical care, necessary care. If you're not going in for those wellness checks, if you're not doing your screenings for breast cancer, for prostate cancer, you have that greater likelihood of, when you are experiencing symptoms, now you are in a much more critical stage 3, stage 4 of cancer. And it's much, much more expensive for the insurance company to cover and treat. And it's often a death sentence for the person who has gone too long without catching a chronic condition like cancer, in its early stages. So ultimately, this reduces costs in the long run, improves outcomes, and improves overall quality of life, so that everybody has a chance to have the pursuit of happiness and health, and is able to contribute to our families and contribute to our society as a whole. Everybody wins.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I appreciate that reminder that, I think it's easy to think of gender affirming care as just, some kind of surgeries or hormones, but really we're talking about broadly the healthcare, preventative care, like you said, that people need to access. I'm wondering too, and I don't know if who would like to speak on this most, but I don't want to neglect, there's a part of the bill, right, that deals with disorders of sexual development. So, referencing healthcare needs of intersex folks, and wondering if you could speak a little bit to how the bill addresses their needs as well.
I guess I'll take this one too. Folks with differences of sexual development have often had invasive surgeries done at a very young age that have required a lifetime of follow-up surgeries. The funny thing is that when we look at other states that try to ban procedures for transgender people, they always leave that door wide open to be able to intercede for intersex people and carve them up so that they are able to meet the physical expectation of fitting into the gender binary. whether it's medically necessary or not. What this bill does is it crosses over to evaluate what is medically necessary for individuals, leaving the door open, but really is trying to put things through the lens of what is medically necessary. Is there, can we be able to hit the brakes and really make sure that this is a necessary surgery for those individuals without it being for the convenience of, the other people that may be involved, judging things from a place of what they view as normal and in the gender binary, creating space for those that lie between, which can be a wonderful place for those that are inhabiting their own bodies fully and enjoyably and don't feel the discomfort. At the same time, those of us that do feel the discomfort can be able to access medical interventions as determined necessary.
Thanks, Brooke. I'm wondering, Sai, if you would want to speak to a little bit. I know we've got folks wondering for a little clarification around, what is gender dysphoria or gender incongruence? What are, we talk about the medical necessity, but I think for folks who aren't maybe familiar with the experiences and needs of trans folks and non-binary folks might not know what those concepts are. But I know that's something that you do a lot of education about.
Yeah, well, I think, dysphoria looks different for everyone. For some of it's physical dysphoria, and it manifests in different ways. I know that, and not that I want to start some discourse here, Brooke and other folks, but why not, right? There's a big thought that to be trans, you have to have dysphoria. And I would argue that for a lot of us, our dysphoria lessens when we are able to have access to these procedures or to therapy or being able to legally change our name and things like that. But for most of us, we do have dysphoria. I had dysphoria very much before I had top surgery. To the degree that there's sometimes I didn't want to leave my house. There's a lot of times that if I wasn't able to safely wear my binder, like if I was on a flight, it's almost like this magnification of, and sometimes it's things in your head, but it's also society telling you that who you are isn't right, and you feel like this. That you don't belong. And as somebody who's non-binary, it's very hard because I'm not ultra femme, I'm not ultra masculine. But when I had top surgery, that really did help me. I remember waking up and crying and just looking down and being like, this is the body I've always wanted. And it's a very hard thing, I think, for people who don't have dysphoria to understand that and that pain. But it's something that, and I think it's something that we struggle with on different levels. And I think it's something you'll never have empathy on if you don't have it. But when trans folks, when we talk to each other and we talk about how do you counter your dysphoria, what do you do? How do you deal with those things? As a non-binary person, I still feel it when people, treat me in a feminine way because I'm very masculine and very, masculine presenting. And so that triggers my dysphoria when people say, here you go, ma'am. Because I'm like, sometimes it's just little interactions like that. And I appreciate, Brooke, what you said about folks who live between the binary. There's millions of us in this country. We've existed for a long time, but we still have dysphoria too, and we still access gender affirming procedures. In fact, I saw a statistic the other day that 20% of people who get top surgery are non-binary. And so, it's also about shifting the understanding of what dysphoria is and who it affects in the trans community, how it affects us, and how we support each other with that. You were asking, I think, about educating folks about it. I think one of the biggest things that's happening right now is misinformation about gender affirming healthcare and what it means, and especially with minors, but even with adults, we are not mutilating our bodies. We are going into this with a very informed, decision. We work with doctors, and a lot of us work with therapists and family and friends and things like that. It's not something you jump into all of a sudden. You come out as trans and you get like a starter pack, and in 7 to 10 business days, all of a sudden everything's done. Like it's a gender journey. And, for a lot of us, it takes a while, it's a fragile journey. And I wish people would understand that for us, it's a hard thing too. And what we need from allies is understanding, and we need empathy, and we need grace in these journeys, for people to know that this is a process for us. But I think allyship looks like understanding that if you've met one trans person, you've met one trans person. We are all different. We all have different journeys. And, to counter the misinformation, like, please get educated, please, or, watch television shows or movies with trans folks in them. Gender Revolution is great. Disclosure is great. There's so much stuff right now that's streaming that if you just sit down and are able to understand our journeys and see, I think it's about humanizing a lot of this. And the misinformation that's out there right now, especially, what I hate to hear is that they talk about the regret rate that trans folks have with surgeries. And they did a study 2 years ago in 2021, and they surveyed almost 9,000 trans folks that have had gender affirming surgery. And the regret rate on it was 1%. 1% of trans folks regret surgery. And I would argue that for a lot of them, it's an aesthetic thing or it's a safety thing, that they are detransitioning, which is very rare, but still valid. And, if you look at regret rates in other kinds of medical care, 65% of cisgender people regret their plastic surgery. So, to put it in terms of that's what we have to counter and say is like, this is something I always like to say when I'm talking about gender affirming life care or healthcare, I always say it's life saving gender affirming healthcare, because that's how important it is. And that is the outcome, is that we are reducing suicide. We are reducing self-harm and all of these things that we do not as a result of who we are, but how society treats us. So yeah, I'm sorry. I know that was a long answer to a very simple question. So sorry about that.
That was eloquent, Sai, and you hit so many of the key points. This is life affirming, life saving care. Everybody has a specific individualized pathway. The medical journey is unique. The societal experiences are unique. The processes through identification, bureaucracy, and credit reports is unique. So, there's similarities, but every story is one's own. And, when we hear groups or headlines that try to lump everything together, it's just not reality. There's also a real big importance to separate sex and gender identity. We've got a whole lot of folks out there that choose not to understand us, to choose bigotry over comprehension, that want to make this about sexual activity. And that's got nothing to do with it. It has to do with how do we go through life? How are we experiencing connections with other people in our very gendered binary society? And where are we comfortable in living within ourselves and our own bodies and our own expressions as we walk through our daily existence? It's not about who we're shacking up with, if we even are shacking up with somebody. It's about how we are conducting ourselves in our daily activities.
Absolutely. Well said. I appreciate that. On that note of disinformation, though, I'm wondering, Andre, if you could speak a little bit to, I know we've been seeing sort of this recycling of old anti-gay stereotypes and tropes and things like that. What are you seeing in terms of the response of the folks you engage with around trans issues as compared to other LGBT issues? Are you seeing these things coming up again? And what are kind of some of the major pieces of disinformation that you're seeing come up?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Sai and I were having a similar conversation on our ride home the other day, which is another story. But, it is unfortunate that we were in a place where we thought that we were doing well in the equality movement, when we're pushing forward. We were doing a lot of training to businesses and schools to get people familiar and aware of what it means to be LGBT and specifically trans and gender diverse. And we were moving along quite well until around 2016. Where things started to change with the Trump administration and a lot of the rhetoric, and with a lot of things that changed with the election of Trump, where people just felt emboldened to be outwardly racist and outwardly homophobic and even more so transphobic than before. It put us on our heels and reminded us that there's always work to do. And so we started to hear these things about us being groomers and mentally ill, and all of the work we did to get parents to accept their children for being LGBTQ was almost taken away out of the work that was done in Texas to make it a child welfare issue for parents to provide gender affirming care to their children. And the absurdity of it is, you want parents to have choice in the privacy of their home, but then you have public entities going into these private homes telling parents what to do, all in the name of transphobia. And it was a new template that we had to work with that was using old rhetoric. And so as the record number of anti-LGBTQ bills are entering state legislatures across the nation, with that heavy, disproportionate number of those being anti-trans and anti-gender diverse, we have a lot of work to do, because there is still a lot of education that we need to provide to folks about just the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, which people easily conflate, which is difficult to sometimes untangle when we're having these conversations with people who don't otherwise know anything. And so we find ourselves trying to find the right messaging to combat these issues that can be very state specific. But we're beyond the age of the internet. It is what it is, where these messages easily cross state lines. And so things that come out of Florida and Texas that are bonkers to us, we then find ourselves dealing with that. And lastly, I'll say, this past election cycle was particularly hard because we had mailers hitting people's mailboxes with this deplorable anti-trans information. And so could you just imagine, like, if you are trans yourself, or a sibling thereof, or a parent of, and you open up your mailbox, you have to see this mess? Like, that's harmful, it's hurtful, and it's unnecessary. And so to combat some of these things, we are leaning on our allies to do the work, supporters like Senator Scheibel. And, with Silver State Equality, we just want to make sure we do our part to support, things like this. So just partnering with Transgender Allies Group and Gender Justice to do the work, because it's going to take all of us in the entire letter, the alphabet of LGBTQ plus to make this world a better place. And so, we're here for it, though.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think it's always important to remember the history of what we've already seen in these movements from opposition. And that mailer, it's like, I don't have to imagine. It was one of the first things I got in the mail after I moved to Nevada, right? To get that in the mail as a trans person, it's like, oh my gosh, we're still doing this thing. Okay. But I'd love to take it back to Senator Scheibel. I'm curious, we, like Andre said, we can't put up a wall to keep the disinformation out coming in from other states. To what extent do you feel like some of that disinfo is, taking hold in lawmakers' minds, right? Are folks kind of buying into this? And if so, what ways have you found to be effective in kind of shifting perspectives and opinions on it?
So I feel very lucky to be part of the legislature in Nevada specifically, because Nevada is one of the best places in the country to be a member of the LGBTQ community. We have protections in law that other places don't have. They should, but they don't have the same protections in law in housing, employment. Now we're talking about medical benefits, right? And in addition to those legal rights, I think that we have a very strong culture in Nevada of supporting the LGBTQ community. And I'm not saying that there is not discrimination, there's not transphobia in Nevada, but something that I'm really proud of is that even as all of these bills have been coming forward in other states, my impression, being a member of the legislature, is that even the furthest right, most transphobic member of this body would not dare to introduce such garbage in Nevada because they know that we will not stand for it. We do not entertain these conversations. We do not have these debates. We do not question anybody's validity as a person, as a human being based on their identity. That is not what we do in the Nevada legislature. We can have great conversations way far on one end of the spectrum and debate exactly what kinds of gender affirming care should be included in a bill. We can debate whether or not we should still be using the term gay, lesbian, bisexual in statute, or whether we should turn it to LGBT. We've had debates about whether LGBT was self-explanatory or whether we had to spell it out in statute. Those are the conversations that we have. And I'm very proud of that because I really do believe that lawmakers who came before me, Senator Parks, Senator Spearman, who is still in the body, but was elected before I was, that, the people who came before us really developed this culture. And I think that it's not even just acceptance, but kind of protectionist, that, we acknowledge that members of the LGBTQ community are part of our community and we won't stand for any kinds of attacks against them. Now, I also want to acknowledge that it doesn't mean that there are not people in the building, the legislative building, even members of the legislature who are misinformed, ignorant, uninformed, either on particular issues or in their entirety. And so the work is never done. We continue working to educate our colleagues to make sure that they do understand that, hey, it's cool that you have a gay brother, but that doesn't mean that you can use that word that starts with an F in public. Or, hey, I'm super happy that you support marriage equality. And also, it's important that we recognize that sometimes, it's not enough. So the work keeps on going. And I think that we're also very lucky to have a huge coalition. BBP is a member of the Equality Coalition. Silver State Equality is a member of the Equality Coalition. This huge equality coalition that helps us to ensure that every bill we pass, every conversation we have, members of the LGBTQ community are part of that conversation, and we're keeping in mind the unique ways that we might be affected by a particular policy or a particular bill. And so having that, constant, strong group of support around us, I think is what makes it possible to keep doing this work and keep fighting the disinformation and keep fighting the bigotry until we put ourselves out of business.
It's really encouraging to hear. So, and I can't help but ask, given my role as the story bank organizer and as a trans person, what role do you think the real stories of real trans people play in shaping public perception and the perception of lawmakers?
Huge. I mean, it is immeasurable, and I think that one thing I want to see happen before I retire is electing a trans person to the Nevada legislature. I think that is the next frontier. And I know a few who are really excellent candidates who I would support in a heartbeat that are amazing and may even be on this call. And the reason that I know them is because I know their stories, right? And I think that whatever we can do to elevate the stories of everybody's lived experience is absolutely crucial. And, lawmakers, like everybody else, it's way easier to pop off on Twitter about what drag queens are and what they do and how they influence society, it's much harder to look somebody in the eye who comes to Carson City to testify and actually, kind of spew that kind of hate to a real human person. And that's not to say that we should be, tokenizing trans people or drag queens or other members of the community and bringing them in for the sole purpose of, checking the bad attitudes of some members. But it is to say that every time a person steps up and takes that risk and, tells their story and has the vulnerability to share with us what they have experienced, it's not for nothing. It's not it does make a difference. That's what I'm trying to say.
Can I add something to that, Erin? I want to say that it's especially for me incredible to see this happening this month, because this is the Trans Month of Visibility. And at the end of the month, we will have the Trans Day of Visibility, which I just got done with a meeting with a lot of the organizers. And, we were talking about one of the things of countering this sentiment of wanting to erase trans people, because I think that really is the end goal of a lot of these folks on the other side in opposition, is they don't want us to be openly trans. They don't, they're talking about drag queens, but when we talk about, criminalizing drag, what we're talking about is criminalizing gender nonconformity, and anybody who makes people uncomfortable, that's what they want to get rid of. And so drag queens right now, unfortunately, are the target, but this will extend to butch women, to feminine boys, to people like me. This is a way to try to eradicate those of us who dare to go outside of society's, expectations of what is how you express gender. And so I think it's especially a point that is happening this month. And as the senator just said, it is important to have folks out there who are upfront and talking about their stories and sharing them, because that's where we see the shift, right? When we can open up hearts and minds. I always say with my education, if I can make you cry, like you've learned something, you've understood the injustice in the world and you've seen why we are marginalized and why we are afraid and the progress that needs to be made. And so I think it is especially important. And, the end of the month, what we're focusing on is trans joy, and we're talking about visibility. There is so much right now trauma that is happening in our community that is we're getting battered by it, to be honest, every single day. And I appreciate, Brooke, when you were try not to focus what's happening in other states. It's really hard not to, because those folks in those states, they're going to end up, they already are coming here. And I'm glad that we can be a safe haven for those folks. But what is happening right now, the absolute vitriol and hatred that is happening to the trans community, I'm trying right now to focus on the good stuff, and I'm trying to focus on the positive, representation and the things that people are doing that's really great and uplifting the community. And so, sorry, that was a lot there. But again, I think it's seeing us visible, and especially for young people right now, they're getting that messaging from other states. They're losing their healthcare. They're being forced to detransition. I shudder to think of the suicide rates that are going to be happening in those states when you're forcing these kids who have found that trans joy and that what we call gender euphoria, when we get to a point where we're proud and we're so happy with our bodies and who we are, and that they're forcing these kids to go back. This is terrifying to me and the entire trans community. But if they can see us visible and thriving, that is a really important thing.
One of the things that you said was about societal norms. Let's just tease that apart a little bit. Society can be very, very forgiving, from what I have found, of differences when we're talking on an individual basis. However, there is a very narrow slice of this country, of many societies, that is authoritarian, is patriarchal, and insists on a strict gender binary, and is often fostered through a very fundamental type religious belief structure. Those are the folks that are being whipped up into a frenzy against us for not fitting their ideal of what society, what other people are supposed to look like. And they're being influenced and harnessed by those that want to make this a wedge issue politically. And they're walking on the dead bodies of children to be able to try to swing votes. It is a very demented, sick, and twisted philosophy that's driving this. And we have, as allies, are the ones that really need to stop up, call it out, and put an end to that kind of disinformation in all of the different communities, whether it is in white suburbia, whether it is in communities of color, whether it is in churches. The allies have to stop. And if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, call it a duck, call the bigots out for the hateful, uninformed lies that they are perpetuating.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely a lot of work there for allies to do. I want to bounce back to something Sai said that thought might connect us to the other bill a bit. You mentioned something about how I think there's like two ends of the spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum, you can make the point that all people, or many people, can be impacted by the kind of criminalization of gender nonconformity, right? You don't have to be a trans person or even a gay, lesbian, or bisexual person, right, to be discriminated against based on how you present in the world. And so there's this one way of looking at it where it's like, actually, this affects a lot of you. But then on the other hand, I'm thinking about how do we center and uplift the folks that are most vulnerable, most marginalized in our communities, and thinking about the other bill that we were hoping to talk about a little bit tonight, right, that impacts folks who are incarcerated. And so I'm wondering, either Andre or Senator Shevell, if you could tell us a little bit about that bill and how that kind of fits into the bigger picture, like we're talking about, of healthcare and just ensuring folks equal rights.
Shevell, I'll throw it to you.
Sure. So I've introduced a bill this session, SB 153, that will require the Department of Corrections to develop a policy regarding trans and gender nonconforming people who are in their custody. So inmates at the Nevada Department of Corrections, which is our prison system, who are trans and gender nonconforming. And this bill does have kind of a long history, but I'll summarize it in saying that there have been, in the last 4 years, the Department of Corrections got a new director that kind of went backwards. We have a new director now. So basically, here's the idea. When people are incarcerated, it is not the purpose of incarceration to impose punishment outside of them being incarcerated. That is the punishment. The punishment is that you are taken away from your friends, your family, your livelihood, your community. You are isolated in a prison for a certain period of time. Many people have experienced in that prison setting additional penalties that include not having access to not only medical care, but other treatment, other accommodations, and I'll explain what I mean by accommodations for their gender identity. And so some things that we were seeing in the Nevada Department of Corrections included the very, straightforward misclassification, housing people in the wrong place. And then there was lack of access to medical care. But then there were also some more subtle differences, things like in different facilities, someone might have been placed in the right facility. For example, a trans woman may have been placed in the women's part of the facility, but then not provided with the proper undergarments that they needed because of their anatomy. And so the purpose of the bill is to ensure that the new director of the Department of Corrections, who I've had a conversation with about this, who is supportive, who is willing to get to work with us, and he's very clear about wanting to work with transgender people in the community and inside the Department of Corrections to develop policies that say every person who comes into the Department of Corrections will get an individualized assessment. And as they remain in custody, there's going to be a policy in place that if they're not being treated properly according to their gender or gender identity, if they're not getting that access to proper undergarments or menstrual products, or there is a person, whether it is an employee or another incarcerated person who is making disparaging comments, they have some recourse for that, because it's not part of incarceration to be punished for who you are. And we recognize that trans people do face unique challenges in that prison setting that other populations don't. And in order to treat people equitably, it doesn't always mean that you treat them the same. It means that you have a policy in place that accounts for those differences and ensures that if somebody is being treated differently because of their gender identity, they have some process to access justice and to be treated equitably based on their gender or gender identity. So that's what the bill does. And it's being heard probably in about 2 weeks in the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, that's huge, right? Like, I think that what you said really stands out is that you shouldn't be layering on additional punishments, right? People are already there. They're already being punished for something. You don't need to add this kind of cruel and unusual bit on top. I want to go to some of the audience questions. We've had a couple that are, I think, kind of similar in the sense that it seems like there should be other maybe federal laws or policies that would require the equal treatment or non-discrimination of trans folks in these spaces. So, what is it about, say, like the ACA or other federal laws that don't go far enough? Or what is it that why do we need to push this forward on the state level as well?
There's a couple of issues there. The Affordable Care Act, in essence, does cover this kind of discrimination, non-discrimination in healthcare insurance. However, it is interpreted differently by different companies, by different states, et cetera, et cetera. It's been interpreted differently by the previous administration than it is by the Biden administration. By clarifying, because health insurance is regulated on a state level, by putting it into state statute as clearly as we are striving to, it makes sure that if it changes on the federal level, we still have the state protections, and it clearly delineates what is and is not covered so that you have options of, if being discriminated against, of filing against the insurance company, either through the Insurance Commission or through the Nevada Equal Rights Commission. And by the amended language that we're going to introduce, it specifically says that if you're not including these things, you're discriminating. Okay, this says that you've got to be non-discriminatory. That makes it much more clear for those adjudication boards like the Equal Rights Commission to determine it's clear that they're discriminating. Here's the answer. You got to cover it. So that's what we're trying to do, is to help make sure that it is clearly defined for both the patient and the company, so it doesn't get caught in these vast gray areas that can only be determined who wins by taking them to court. Let's keep it out of the courts. Let's not spend needless money there. Let's put it to where it's supposed to be spent, into healthcare.
Absolutely, because who has money for endless lawsuits just to make sure they can get their health care covered, right?
The deck is stacked in favor of the insurance companies anyway. So let's level the playing field and clearly delineate through statute that we don't discriminate in this state. One other shout out to the current legislature is, I've said for years in legislative hearings that trans rights are women's rights. Plain and simple. We have 60% of our legislature is female. That is a huge deciding factor in understanding the rights of trans people, because they're women's rights as well. When you're in a privileged position that cisgender, heterosexual white men have occupied for so many years, you think everybody is getting, treated like kings because that's what you're treated like. And you don't necessarily understand that not everybody experiences treatment in a healthcare setting, treatment at the burger parlor, or driving down the street is different because of how you wear your hair, how you wear your clothes, the color of your skin. But it's different. Trans people often see that because we get to experience both sides. That's also one of the things that I think scares others about us.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be hard to put in boxes, right? And that doesn't always make people comfortable. Right. Another question we've gotten from the audience, and I know we've talked a little bit about allyship, but how can cisgender folks be, the best possible allies to trans folks in our community, not just, in the fight for these particular bills, but on a day-to-day basis? Because I think we've talked, y'all have talked a bit about like the need for allies to speak up, but what should they be saying? What should they be doing? Especially when we're talking about, there are so many different communities, like you said, where these conversations need to be.
I'm going to say real quick, and I'm going to toss it to side. See something, say something. Take that away.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, shut that shit down when you see it. I mean, if you can safely, I know it's hard if it's your boss or someone like that, it's a person of authority, but that's the only way we do this, right? And that's what we do with other communities, right? Like if we're in a space and someone tells a racist joke, if you're an ally, you're going to say, hey, like that's really up, that's what you have to do is shut that down. But also I think, we talk about tokenizing a lot, and we talk about that. I'm okay if you want if you want me to be your trans best friend and you want to say, well, actually, I know this person. If you want to share that, my story's fine. I don't care. And give them my phone number. I will talk to them. Like, and sometimes that's what it takes is like that human interaction with somebody else. I'm okay. I'm okay with doing that. And I think that the more people really understand us on a human level, I think like one of the things right now of them saying like we're a danger to children. I have children, we are parents. I pay my taxes. I like all of those things. This was like some of the messaging when it came down to like marriage equality. It's like, damn, we just want to get married and suffer in our marriages just like the heterosexual people do. That's what we want, and so like it's, get to know trans folks. And if you don't know some, then say, hey, I know of this person and reach out to them. And, we reach out to folks on social media. A lot of folks are being so brave right now and telling their stories and listen to them and reach out and go, what can I do? But the biggest thing is shutting it down as soon as you see it and then talk about those things. The more we talk about those things, and whether it's these issues or people going through that, then all of a sudden it's a human being. It's not a group of people that you're trying to other, like, say who we are, talk about our journeys. Like I'm okay with you doing that with me. Like, that's fine. I'd like, Venmo me some money if you're going to do it. That'd be great. But like, use our stories. If we are public people and we have been put out there as that, like, talk about us. And that's fine. That's good. And then we can all say, oh, we know. Because that's the problem is a lot of folks don't know trans people. Well, we're out there. We want to engage and talk and things like that, and just use us. If we're willing to be used, use us. That's fine.
Right. I'll never say no to coffee or free food if you want to ask me questions. Andre, did you want to add something?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, as an ally, I really think it's just important to I'm just really going to co-sign a lot of what Sai said, but I think you have to educate yourself, but more importantly, get to know and be friends with or associate yourself with people who are transgender, non-binary, nonconforming, fluid, you'll learn a lot. You'll learn there are people just like you, but you'll learn about the journey, and you can empathize with your own journey with whatever issue that you have. But when you actually take the time to do the reading, the hearing, the watching of documentaries and stuff like that, going to those trainings when they're offered at your work, you just learn and you realize that it's not what you thought. They're not who you were told by other people they are. But people who discriminate use the same tools of division, misinformation. And so it's hard for me when I see other minorities being discriminatory and hateful towards the trans and gender diverse communities, because it's kind of like using the same effing stuff on other people that's used about you. And you just wish that people can sometimes wrap their minds around like the mental gymnastics that they have to do to then inflict that harm that's often inflicted upon them. But once we have these conversations with people, the learning can begin. So you can begin to say something to someone when they say something stupid. Like I have friends all the time that say effed up stuff, either intentionally or unintentionally, but you have to just like, hey, can't say that. No, that's not true. It's exhausting, but there's no other way that you're going to get the message out. And sometimes you as an ally have to be the messenger for someone else to hear it. And I'm okay with being the messenger. I'm okay with course correcting people when it's necessary. And so one thing that was a proud moment for me, I'll just end with this. It was years ago when I was at the National Alliance to End Homelessness doing LGBTQ policy work around homelessness. And a colleague of mine, we're having a meeting, and she leans across the desk, the table. She's like, I have a question for you. I really want to know, like, why do you advocate so hard, like, for trans people? And she's like leaning in, trying to get the scoop. And I'm like, because they're people just like me. They have discrimination. They face discrimination just like I have and my people have. Like for me, it was like a no-brainer. There's no there. It's just something that I feel is necessary. It's important that I be a voice for the larger LGBTQ plus movement and people that are within there. And so it's a badge of honor for me to be able to do this work and be an ally. And so I just encourage everyone, like, we can't just be allies to folks that look like us or in our category, right? Like there are other folks who need our support, because one day we're gonna need their support. So it's all like a big family. We gotta treat it that way.
Absolutely. I often think about how the various types of discrimination we all face is kind of like those weeds that send runners under the ground, right? If you don't pull it out by the roots, it's just going to pop up somewhere else, right? So definitely showing up for each other is super important. Well, I want to thank you all so much for being here tonight. I know we're up against time now, but reminding folks that obviously a good way to learn more is to check out the websites and social for all of your organizations, which I know we'll be sharing in the chats and on our social media as well. And then I also want to really encourage folks, I know it's 8 o'clock in the morning and no one wants to be up that early, but even if you aren't going to testify for SB 163, I think it could be really informative just to listen. Not only to listen to hear from folks within the community sharing their stories, but I think it can be really informative to hear from the opposition, right? Because I think if you're not in a particular group, you're not always hearing what they're up against. And so really want to encourage folks to tune into that. But thank you all so much for being here tonight. It's been a really wonderful conversation, and look forward to chatting again with you all soon.